This video is about how to make the pinch front cap. Pinch front. So the pinch front pattern comes once again, and this one comes in 3 different panels. So you have your front panel, so a big front panel. You have the back panel, which looks just like the 6-panel back panel, and the side panel, which also looks like one of the 6-panel panels, but it's not. So what you'll get is basically a hat pack that comes with all of your pieces here. So like I said, you're gonna have your big front piece here, you're gonna have your side pieces here, which is marked with 2 dots and 1 dot. 1 dot indicates it goes to the front panel here, 2 dots indicates it goes to the back panel there. So we're going to start with sewing the front panel here. So you're also going to have a pile of backing fabrics that will be the back of the front, basically the inside lining of the front panel there. So some of the fabrics are directional in terms of what the front and the back of the fabric actually are. This particular one doesn't really matter. Most of the time the interface fabrics are going to be a little bit stiffer, a little bit heavier than the other fabric. Sometimes they won't be. In any case, you match your 2 pieces together, the 2 front panels here, and the same as before you start sewing, you're going to mark the sewing machine at 3/8. So you're going to take your ruler and you're going to mark from, you're going to set the needle down on any particular one, it doesn't really matter, and mark 3/8, which would be on mine here, I have it marked right there. So you got 1, 2, 3/8. You put it up here. It's really helpful if you can mark it with a Sharpie and then put a piece of tape down. The tape's not going to rub off, Sharpie will rub off. And you're also going to mark on either side of your needle to where that way you can sew on either side. You can set your magnetic guide on either side there. So after you've marked your sewing machine, we're going to start sewing the front panel. So you're going to put the 2 pieces, the front and the back panels together. For this particular one, you're going to fold these guys over, make sure your all your lines match up there as best as you can, and you're going to sew the front pinch here. You're going to set your magnetic guide up to the 3/8 on the line of the tape, right on the edge of the tape there where you had marked it. Once again, just make sure all of your fabrics are all matched up there. Put your little sew those 2 front pieces together. Clean up your bits there. So the same as the 6-panel cap, I like to clip a 45-degree angle on these guys, or just basically clip the tips off. That allows for the top of the cap. There's a little bit less bulk at the top of the cap when you sew it all together there. So for this particular one, I don't top stitch this first one. I just leave it alone. When you're sewing the other pieces together, you're going to want to flatten it out when you do the top stitch along the whole thing here. Rather than having it hang on to one side or the other, you're going to want to flatten out both edges like that, and that just keeps, once again, less bulk in that area. It makes the hat lay symmetrical rather than asymmetrical. So this cap's a little bit easier than the other caps. A little bit easier than the 6-panel cap at least, because you don't have to really worry about this front piece anymore. So after you've done the front panel, we're going to move on to the back panel. Once again, back panel has no markings because it's pretty self-explanatory. This is going to be the hole that's in the very back of the hat. You're going to put your fabrics face to face. You're going to put your fabrics face to face there, and you're going to sew this line here. So my guide's already set up. Match my fabrics together. Put the fabric right up against the guide there. And once again, seam allowances are incredibly important for these. You're always going to want to make sure you are trying your best to keep your fabrics right at the 3/8 line. If you go over 3/8, the cap will be smaller. If you go under 3/8, the cap will be bigger. If you're going to err on one side or another of that 3/8 seam allowance, always err on the smaller side. That way the cap is a little bit bigger rather than a little bit smaller. More people have larger heads than smaller heads. So after you've done that, you're going to remove your guide. You're going to do your top stitch. For your top stitching, I try and have the seam. It's a little bit hard to see with this fabric, but I try and have the seam where you just the seam right in the middle of one of the prongs on your foot there. That's a good indicator for me. If you don't have the two little prongs, it's about a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch. This allows for enough, it's small enough that you catch both sides of the fabric on the underside. So you do your one line there, flip it around, make sure that both of your fabrics are flat. There you go. Got your two lines up top there. Clip your strings, make sure that's all nice and clean. Now is a good time to do this bottom hem here. So you flip your fabric over, fold that bad boy over, make sure your string's out of the way, fold that guy over there. Once again, I fold it over maybe 1/2 inch or so, kind of run along there, making that consistent. Alright. So now you have your back opening where this is the back panel there, so it looks like that. So you got your round and then you got the rest of it there. Alright, so after you've got your back panel all figured out, so sew that together. We're going to move on to the side panel. Once again, side panel is marked with a 1 and a 2. The 1 goes to the front, 2 goes to the back. So most of the time they're going to be marked on both sides. So this has a 2 there, 2 there, a 1 here, a 1 here. Some of the fabrics are a little bit harder to see. If you can't find them, you'll have the cardboard cutouts for the patterns that you can just lay the pattern over it to see what the orientation is. So we're going to take our piece here, take the 2, make sure your fabrics are face to face. This particular one, it doesn't really matter because the plaid's just plaid on both sides. Match both of your fabrics together. Set your guide up to the 3/8 line there. Line the bottoms up. And obviously when you're sewing this stuff, you're really trying not to pull on anything too much, because if you pull on the fabric, it can create weird stretching in certain places. Alright. And oftentimes, this is kind of weird what I did, but oftentimes I have this piece on the bottom and then I'll sew the side panel on the top, but it doesn't really matter, just as long as your sides are matched up properly. So same thing, this one's not quite as big of a deal because this fabric's a little bit thinner, but you're going to cut the excess off on the tip there. You're going to move your guide and do your top stitching. Same thing with the top stitching, just flatten both sides out there. Make sure everything looks good underneath, which it doesn't look like it is. Alright, make sure everything's situated here. bad boy over. Make sure everything's still okay down below there. Once again, keeping that seam kind of in the middle of that prong on the foot helps for consistency. Another thing that you may or may not consider, if you start your top stitch on the bottom, there's less thread to go through later on the top. It's very not that big of a deal, but it is. So once again, you kind of have this nice straight line. That's going to be helpful when you put all your panels together. So we have our 3 pieces sewn together here. You got the 2 backs on the one side. So you're going to do the opposite on this on the front panel. So I'm going to try and get in here as best I can. So since the side is on that one, on the front panel, you're going to do the sewing on the side of here. Once again, it's marked as well. So 2 dots, 1 dot. This side is going to be sewn over here. So this is a perfect example of why I do the I mark on both sides. So I know that I've marked this side with a piece of tape for 3/8, and I know that this line here, where the piece of metals connect here, is 3/8. So that's why I have you mark your sewing machine on both sides 3/8, so that in case you need to sew lefty, you can. So you're going to set your guide up there. You're going to put your let's see here. You're going to put your 2 pieces of fabric together. Once again, just double checking the orientation of this. You're going to put your 2 pieces of fabric together. Try your best to have these, the top and the bottom layer of the front, match together. And then you're going to put your side panel onto there. Get some of the excess string and fuzz off of here, so it's not sewn into it. So once you have all your pieces lined up there, put your fabric right up against the guide there. And just double checking that all the pieces are going to stay pretty much together. That's about as good as it's going to get. And just kind of sew along here. Make sure that you're staying within those 3/8 seam allowance there. So like I was telling you about in the beginning, you're going to want to flatten this little piece up there so that it's not sewn on one side or the other, and just kind of hold that bad boy down. Alright. Take your work out there. Clean up your strings. Take your guide away. You're going to do the top stitching on here. Once again, clip this little top. You can. It helps. Every little bit helps there. So when you're doing your top stitching, I generally do the side with the most bulk first, just so that because the side with the most bulk is going to be the side that's going to want to stay unfolded the most. Alright. Just kind of holding these edges down here while I do this top stitching. Fold this top stuff up as best you can. So we originally clipped all that stuff so that there'd be less bulk. There's always going to be some bulk up there, but as little as possible is the best. So I'm having a little bit of trouble here just because this bottom part's trying to fold over. Alright. So flip your work around, make sure that this bottom piece is going to be nice and flat again. sure your piece over here is nice and flat at the bottom. Do your top stitch. So this one's trying to kind of kick me off there, so I'm just gonna have a little bit larger of a stitch on this side. Alright. Flip that off, double check, make sure that it caught all the edge. It got close on some of this, but the whole edge is caught there. So now we're going to attach, like I said, we did kind of opposites for this. You got the sides and the front and the back. So the same as the 6 panel, it's important to make sure this back line here meets up with this front line. So for this one, I'm going to try the pin method. So for the pin method, you're going to put do your fabrics face to face. This line here, which is the middle of the front, match up with the middle of the back there. Okay, make sure the tops match up there, and then you put a pin through it. Okay. I'm just going to double check, see what this looks like on the inside here. Yeah, so it's not quite lined up, but basically you put the pin, it's going to go through the middle of both, goes through the middle of both of the seams there. Okay, and I have it just sticking up so that it can move a little bit more freely, so that the piece can pivot, because you're sewing around a circle right now. It's basically just kind of to hold the top and the bottom together, but not necessarily pin them down. So you're going to, when the pin is up, obviously, when the pin is straight up, obviously the pieces are straight together. So you're going to kind of try and keep an eye on that pin and make sure that's straight up. So we're going to match all of our fabrics. You're going to set your guide up to the 3/8 there. And right now we're sewing the front and the back 2 pieces together. So make sure your panels are all lined up there. Your guide set up to 3/8. Double check that guy. You're going to sew these 2 pieces, still keeping an eye on the pin here, making sure that's straight up there. And sewing your 2 pieces together and making sure that your fabrics edges all stay together. Okay. So we're kind of getting to our pivot point here. Same type of thing, just make sure your fabrics are all staying together there. This, if you have your pin situated a little bit farther down, you don't have to take the pin out. But for my situation, I'm going to take the pin out, because otherwise I'll run it over. Continue to sew, try and keep that 3/8 allowance there. Also trying not to tug on the fabric too much, especially like with this wool stuff here, it's kind of stretchy. So, and I ran out of bobbin, that's awesome. Alright. Alright, well, I ran out of bobbin, so hopefully this doesn't happen to you, but especially on the little tippy top, that kind of sucked. But it's alright. So once again, staying with the 3/8 there, making sure your fabrics are kind of all together on the top. Continuing on. Keeping that seam allowance on the top at 3/8 makes it easier to catch that fabric when you do the top stitch all the way along there. Once again, if you've done it properly, it looks like this piece was cut a little bit short, but if you've done it properly, And also this fabric's a little bit stretchier, so I'm not surprised that there's a little bit of excess fabric here. But generally, if your seam allowances are correct, both of these pieces will match. But like I said, this wool is a little bit stretchy, so it has a little bit more give than the other like canvas stuff there. So yeah, now we have our pieces, front and the back pieces sewn together. We're going to look at the top and the bottom. And this is the front and that's the back. It looks like this line is pretty dang good as far as like lined up. It's almost on the dot exactly. So maybe the pin method works a lot better than the tacking it method. So now we're going to do our top stitch. Take the guide away. Once again, by this time you're probably pretty good at doing top stitch. So like I said, I try and do the bulky side first. Let's see here. Make sure my fabric's all situated underneath there. I don't know why my sewing machine's not rolling, but so this top stitch is the hardest top stitch of all the pieces, just because there's a lot more material to handle. So we're going to kind of get into the top here. I'm going to show you, it's going to look all bunched up, but this is the top where all the panels come together. You're going to do your best to fold both pieces aside and try and keep them flat. Yeah, as you kind of come across here, once again, just keep double checking and make sure all your pieces are nice and flat up there. Really try and do your best to catch the inside fabric on the bottom there, and that just ensures that that top piece stays as flat as it possibly can, because there's a lot of pieces of fabric that come together up there. So alrighty, flip our work around here. So along this edge here, just continuing to make sure your fabric stays nice and flat on the bottom. Top stitching is a little bit easier on these triangle pattern caps, or the caps that have the triangle pieces for the pattern, rather than the 5-panel cap, just because the 5-panel cap has more curves, so it's harder to keep a nice straight stitch on a curve than it is just going straight. Okay. Alright, so that's that. Clip our excess string here, and that's basically a finished crown. So it looks like, since the top stitch, this the front and the back pieces have scooted over a little bit. Doesn't look like it's all that big of a deal, but in theory you're going to want you know, this line to match up with this line to match up with this line. It's not always going to be that way, but if you have the back is way over here and then the front is way over there, that's going to be a crown that I'm not going to be able to use. But overall, this looks pretty good. All the lines are pretty consistent on here. It's a little bit of a hiccup here, but it's not all that bad. But yeah, that's basically a finished crown for this particular style of cap. If you look at the inside here, like I said before, just catching, when you're doing that top stitch, catching the fabrics on both sides ensures that the top is flat. See? Ensures that the top is flat. Once again, with these kind of contrasting fabrics, one's a tight weave, it's a stiff thread or yarn that they're using for the actual fabric. This stuff's quite a bit thinner. so that can be a little bit tricky sometimes. But overall, this crown looks pretty well put together. Same thing with this middle piece. You're gonna flatten it out and just keep it flat, but there's no top stitching on there. So, yep, that's how you make the pinch front cap.